Hi, in this video I want to show you how to knit these baby mittens, and they are intended for age newborn until 1.5 years. You can adjust the length here by knitting a few rows more, and they are really elastic in the cuff, and they are knitted in a soft merino wool yarn that will give 22 stitches for every 10 centimeters when using needle size 3.5 millimeters. I have used size 3 millimeters, 5 double pointed needles, 4 to hold my stitches and 1 to knit with. These mittens have no thumb, and this is because it's not really practical for a small baby to have a mitten on to have a thumb on the mitten. The thumb will be small and tricky to make. It will be difficult to get such a small thumb into it, and when you are a small baby and it is cold outside, I think it might be best to keep all the fingers together. And because it has no thumb, it is also easier to knit. So I will show you in this video step by step how I make these mittens with all techniques included. And to get the stitch number and the measurements, you can follow the link that I put in the video description down here, and just have fun knit the mittens. Thank you. I begin by casting on my stitches evenly distributed on 4 of my needles, and I begin by making this slip knot, which I place onto one of my needles, and this will be the first stitch. And to make a really nice elastic cuff with an elastic edge as well, this is how I cast on. Just hold this first stitch with my left hand, and I pinch my yarn between my middle finger and my thumb. Then I use my index finger from underneath and up, twist so that I get this loop around my index finger. I place my knitting needle on top of the yarn and move it down to the tip of my index finger, up through the loop, and I slip it onto the needle. So make the loop, knitting needle on top, down to the tip of my index finger, and slip the stitch onto the needle. And I just keep going like this until I have the amount of stitches that I want on my needle. So then I find my next knitting needle and I place it underneath like this. I just secure it there, and I keep going the exact same way. I just make sure that the first stitch here gets as close as possible to the last one on the first needle, and then I just keep going the same way until I have all my stitches evenly distributed on 4 needles. So my cast on is finished, and I organize my needles so that the first and the last needle I cast on is on top of the 2 others. This is just to make it easier to begin, and it doesn't get in conflict with these two needles as easily. And now I will begin to knit the ribbing for the cuff. And for these mittens I have chosen to knit my ribbing like this, that I knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. And my knit stitches I do like this. I stick my needle through the stitch from left and towards the right like this. I go to the tip of my index finger and I move my needle under the yarn to pick it up. I bring it through the stitch and slip it off the needle like this, and I make sure that it ends up close to the last stitch on this other needle. And one more, needle through the stitch from left and towards the right, or underneath and up if you like, to the tip of my index finger, behind the yarn, through the stitch, and I slip it off. When I purl, I begin at the tip of my index finger, I move behind the yarn, and I go through the stitch the same way, only now on the side facing away from me, so from underneath and up, behind the yarn again, and then bring the yarn through the stitch and slip it off the needle. And I do the same again, behind the yarn and up through the stitch, behind the yarn again, and slip it off the needle like this. Make sure not to pull like this, because there you can see I made this big gap. If you do, it's easy to mend. When you knit the next stitches, just make sure when you slip it off the needle, when you get it next to the last stitch there, do not pull anymore. Now you can see my gap is smaller. I knit the next stitch, do not pull, like this. And this I can live with. This is because the way I cast on does not lock each stitch, and it makes it, for some, I guess, a bit tricky to knit the first row. But this is only for the first row, and you will be left with a result that looks good and has a really stretchy edge. So just continue, and the same thing when you are finished knitting one needle and you want to go to the next one, make sure that the first stitch here is placed close to the last one on your last needle, and then you just focus a little bit on your first row to keep this gap as small as possible. And when you have knitted the second and third row, it'll be okay, you won't see it, and you'll get a really good result. So keep knitting this ribbing for as long as you wish the cuff to be, and I will be back with the next step. Now my cuff is finished, and now you can see how elastic my edge is, and this is what it looks like. So The next step is to knit the mitten itself. And now I will do knit stitches only, so no more ribbing. And when I knit over knit stitches here, I do as I did on the ribbing. But when I get to the purl stitches, the stitches are twisted the other way around. So that will that means that I will, when I knit the purl stitches, I stick my needle in from right and towards the left like this, and I knit. If I were to do it the other way, as you would think that I should do, I would twist the stitches. You can see here that when I pull the stitch like this, it looks triangular, pointy here at the bottom. That is because it is twisted at the bottom. When I stick my needle in from the right and towards the left, the stitch opens up a lot more. And you can see here when I knit the knit stitches and pick up the stitch, the same thing happens. The stitch is much more open. So, and you will also notice that if you pick up the purl stitches from the left, it'll be a bit more difficult to pick up the stitch as well. It's much easier when to pick up the stitch when it's untwisted. And this will only be for the first row here. When on the next row you will knit all the stitches again, but then you can stick the needle in from the left and towards the right on all the stitches, because now they are all knit stitches, no purl stitches here. So just keep going and knit until the mitten has the length that you want, or that is given in the recipe. And I will be back with how to decrease for the tip. Now I'm ready to begin my decreases for the tip of the mitten. And I want this mitten to have a slightly pointed tip, like this and this, almost like a Selbu mitten. So I will show you one type of decrease for this side, where I want the mitten to angle from right and towards the left, and another type of decrease here where I want my mitten to angle from the left and towards the right. So this is what I do. First I will knit one stitch, and this will be part of my side band, and for my right to left decrease I slip one stitch, I knit the second, and the first stitch I just slip back over the one I knitted, and then I will just knit my way over to the other side of the mitten. And I will knit until I have 3 stitches remaining here on my left needle. And then I will, for my left to right decrease, I knit the first stitch, I place it back onto my left needle. The next stitch I will slip over, and then I will put it back on my right needle. And I will knit the last stitch, and this will be part of my side band on this side. Now you can see that I have one decrease here that points to the left, and I have one decrease here that points to the right. And I will repeat the exact same operation on this side. Knit one for the side band, decrease, knit over to the other side, decrease, and knit one for the side band. And this will make a total of 4 decreases in one row. And I will repeat this in every row until I have just a few stitches remaining, and then I will be back with how to finish the mitten. Now I have finished my decreases and I am left with 8 stitches. And these are 4 stitches for the side bands and 4 stitches that are the decreases. So, only thing left to do now, if you wonder why I now have only 3 needles instead of 4, that's just because when you have this few stitches it starts to get a little crowded with 4 needles. So next thing I do is that I knit all the remaining stitches, but when I slip them off the needle I just pull my yarn end, which I may have forgotten to tell you, I have also cut my yarn. I just pull my yarn end through each stitch like this. And there's the last one. Then I get a small hole here at the tip of the mitten. I take the yarn end and I bring it through this hole on the wrong side, and I pull to close the hole. Do not pull too tight so that you risk pulling off the yarn. That's not very fun to fix. And this is the finished mitten. So only thing left to do now is to attach these loose yarn ends and make another one. Thank you for watching.